Hello, and thank you for joining me for episode 12 of the Riff Tacos podcast. My name is Paul Misko, and I'm stoked to let you guys know that the podcast has its first official sponsor, which is Gorilla Joe Printing here in Youngstown, Ohio, owned by the one and only Mr. Joe Sidrovic, who is one of my best friends, known him forever, and of course, my bandmate in From a Second Story Window. So huge thank you to Joe and shout out to everyone who works there. They are an awesome company and they do killer work. So stoked about that. Speaking of From a Second Story Window, we've announced some shows recently that are coming up. We're going to be in Columbus on March 8th at Donato's Pizza with See You Next Tuesday, Samara, and Dance Like the Dead. That's going to be a small show. I think they are increasing the capacity for us to about 200 by moving some things around, which we greatly appreciate. But there is no pre-sale. So if you are planning to come to that, I would recommend trying to get there early in case it fills up. And, I don't know how long the line will be or what to expect, but just a warning there. There's no pre-sale tickets. So up next would be Cleveland, March 28th at No Class with Nightmare Unit, Samara, and Gut Gash. Stoked about that one because I haven't been to Cleveland in many years. And I've never been to No Class. I hear it's awesome. So that's another cool, small little joint. And we're stoked to be playing with Nightmare Unit. Detroit, August 22nd, will be at the Sanctuary. We haven't announced a full lineup yet, but it'll be a sick show. Chicago, August 23rd at Sleeping Village with See You Next Tuesday, He Who Corrupts and Something Is Waiting. You can head to the FASWA Instagram, link in bio for tickets for all of those, except for Columbus, which is no pre-sale. Also a reminder, if you're enjoying the show, please remember to subscribe, like the episode, and leave a rating. Every little action you take helps me grow the show, and I greatly appreciate it. So on to tonight, I'm joined by Rich Lombardi, vocalist of the legendary Sawtooth Grin, pioneers of the mathcore scene, pre-MySpace. Bummed I never got to share the stage with them back in the day. But who knows? Maybe we can put something together in 2025 with From a Second Story Window, because I know they've been back and have put out 2 releases the last 2 or 3 years and are playing shows again. But let's get started. This is Riff Tacos with Rich Lombardi. Mr. Rich Lombardi of the Sawtooth Grin, thank you for joining me tonight. How are you?
Thank you for having me, Paul. I appreciate you. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We made it through the technical difficulties. Glad to see your face finally.
Yes. I apologize for being so old at you.
Old at me. Every time I get through a podcast and nothing breaks, I'm pretty stoked. So no worries at all.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence and the comforting word. It makes me feel better about my inadequacies.
Of course. And I wanted to give a shout out to Shane Cashman too for connecting us via Instagram.
100%. Yes. Shout out to Shane.
I was trying to think for a while. I was like, why did we never play a show with you guys when I was in Robinson? I was like, oh, you broke up before we even did anything. I didn't realize the timeline because that would have been awesome.
That would have been awesome, actually. We were up in smoke. I think by the time a lot of those groups were popping off. We were toast at that point.
You guys were kind of like pioneers of this genre. Like when you started, you got together in 1999?
Yeah. Yep. That's right.
Okay. So was the word mathcore even a thing yet, or right?
I mean, it maybe if you ask somebody that's much hipper than me, they'd have a different answer. But as far as I was aware of, in the small hamlet of Montrose, New York, it was not a term that was thrown around.
Right.
No. No.
Yeah, because like I was going through and like looking at Cuddle Monster came out 2001, and then whatever information I get on the internet, I try to do my research as the best I can. But so you started in 1999, and I'm thinking like for this sound that you guys had, like there weren't very many bands before you that you could have pulled like influence from. So like you really were kind of like the godfathers of this like pre-MySpace era grindcore, mathcore, whatever you want to call it. Like who were you taking influence from back then?
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, listen, that's high praise. That's high praise. And, I think that since we've been back on the scene, we've been hearing echoes of similar sentiments, that we were ahead of something or before something or at the start of something or whatever, however you want to put it.
If you're a touring musician, you know how important it is to have reliable merchandise that represents your brand and keeps fans coming back for more. That's where Gorilla Joe Printing comes in. They specialize in high-quality printing and custom merchandise made to make your fans feel like they are part of the experience, from t-shirts to patches and any unique memorabilia in between. Gorilla Joe Printing also helps forecast your inventory, whether you're on or off the road, so you never run out of stock or end up with too much. They even help bands manage their e-commerce stores, keeping your merch business running smoothly 24/7 so you can focus on what you do best, performing. For more info, check out GorillaJoePrinting.com.
At the time we never really felt like that. I mean, we had a lot of hodgepodge to us. You know what I mean? For me, when it comes to direct influences within the genre or, myriad subgenres that we would draw from or come to be associated with, I would say that Cave In was an early push towards going more metallic, going more heavy, getting a little more intense, getting a little more absurd vocally. That if you listen to the the transition between Beyond Hypothermia to like Until Your Heart Stops, there is an inherent absurdity to what like Steve Brodsky's doing on that record. And it's not what I end up doing at all, but there is an absurdity birthed out of like his necessity to have to be the vocalist because they were kind of left hanging on that record. He wasn't going to be doing all the screaming and all that kind of stuff on that record. So there's an inherent like absurdity to his approach on that album that always stuck with me.
Clicked with you.
Yeah, I think big time. For me, we were coming from, that sort of pre-Poison the Well, like, that band Morning Again, pre like technical infused hardcore where you're thinking of like pre-Glassjaw and you're listening to like Sons of Abraham was a big one for me. Dead Guy was probably a huge one for all of us, I think, early on, primarily because they were like weirdly a Victory Records band and we were doing all of that whole Earth Crisis, Strife, Snapcase thing in high school. So it was an easy bridge from all of that stuff to now we're listening to Integrity and now we're listening to Dead Guy and, so on and so forth. And Dead Guy is probably the true jumping off point. In 1999, believe it or not, I go to college that year and that's where I'm shown The Locust. That's where I'm shown the Dillinger Escape Plan, you know, and it's like,
I was going to bring them up because Calculating Infinity came out in 99, right?
Yep, that's right. And so that's like, or 98 even it may have been. I'm not positive. Yeah. But when I'm hit with that, because the conversation with a buddy of mine that I made in college was, are you familiar with Dead Guy? Me saying, are you familiar with Dead Guy? Let me show you this record. Let me show you that record. Let me show you what happened between this point and that point. Like they did Fixation on a Coworker, and then they had a massive lineup change. Actually, they had a massive lineup change before that album even came out. So a lot of people don't really remember that or realize that is that the quote unquote scab Dead Guy was the Dead Guy that was performing that material live by the time it actually came out. So, they had this record that everybody reveres. And then they had this little EP that came out after it. That's like Steve Austin Today Is the Day produced, called Screaming with the Dead Guy Quintet, where it's like the bass player doing vocals now and it's other dudes out of the band and it's a totally different vibe. To me, to this day, I'd make an argument for that EP as being at least as good and showing it to this buddy, and he's like, this kind of reminds me of this new thing, that new sound you've been looking for kind of conversation. And then it's one of those, I get hit with the first self-titled Dillinger thing, the Running Board EP, and then Calculating Infinity, essentially in one afternoon, just like boom, right in my face.
Like, mind blown.
I said, and at that point you're thinking and then it's really just like a steep sort of slope into all of the other wild stuff that we were listening to at the time. For me, there was a band called Drowning Man from Vermont, who had just like this absurd, almost comedic, hyper violent, lyrical content. And then they all just kind of looked like greasers, what I mean? But their sound was like such a weird, very specific, sort of like melange of the different sort of metalcore and like more chaotic things that were happening at the time. Botch, but probably before most of that stuff was Coalesce for me. That first little EP that they did, that 3-song little EP that I think was out, it may have been out on Earache Records, which is probably why I heard of it at all. And, and Sean didn't sound like, Sean Ingram didn't sound like Sean Ingram sounds yet, kind of thing. And then like getting Give Them Rope after that. And that to this day being like a benchmark record for me. Discordance Axis, 2001.
Yeah, I was going to bring them up too. Yeah.
I mean, undefeated champions of loud music, in my opinion, like that record.
Yeah.
That final DA record to me is the pinnacle. But you're also looking at least from my perspective, you're looking at, this weird sort of melting pot in my brain of like Discordance Axis and very specifically like Pig Destroyer. And then very specifically, the Locust and the Blood Brothers, you know what I mean? And that's kind of where I start to settle in. You start thinking of like Discordance Axis, Pig Destroyer, the Locust, the Blood Brothers, Drowning Man, probably. You start to hedge in on some of the within genre influences that kind of shaped where my head was at. But the cool thing about Sawtooth, and the reason why Sawtooth was the way it was that me and my brother came from a lot of that stuff, and our original drummer Thomas, but our guitar player who came to us from across the river, across the Hudson River, Jay Springman, he was coming with a few simpatico like touch points, but otherwise almost wholly a different background. You know what I mean? Like he came from Gorguts, he came from Morbid Angel, you know what I mean? Came from all that. And like the big connection for, I think, all of us was probably Botch and the Dillinger Escape Plan, which no matter who you were those records, you can't really, there's no arguing, there's no arguing. That.
For sure. I remember a lot of those names I didn't hear until later in life, because like I came from the new metal shit. And then when I joined up with Greg and Jeremy, when we were originally called A Good Day to Die Before Robinson, they started throwing all those records at me, and I was like, wow, like what the hell is all this shit?
All about?
And then that totally changed everything for me. And luckily, for them, I would have still been wearing UFO pants and whatever.
You know what's funny? But, I will give. I personally missed most new metal. I missed it. And a lot of times I think, well, that's because I'm kind of old. I'll be 44 on Wednesday. So
I just turned 40, so I'm in the club now.
Hey, happy birthday! Very cool.
Thank you.
Well, cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, coffee.
There it is. Yes, we drink to it. What happened was I weirdly and largely will thank the band Sepultura for essentially giving me the new metal cliff notes and letting me skip it, because I was a big, prior to getting into, you really want to go back into like my youth.
I do.
You did. When I was a young lad, when we were like early mid-teens, we, once you get past all of that, like you just listen to what your parents listen to, And don't get me wrong, I have a great reverence for most of what my parents showed me as a kid. I have more of that, more information about that stuff in my head than like stuff that would be really practical for me to remember. And so I still have huge opinions about, who's the best Beatle and,
right.
That kind of thing. It's George. Everybody knows that. But, once you start to get past that and you start formulating your own opinions on music, I was a grunge kid. That's the age that I'm at, I was a Soundgarden kid. I was an Alice in Chains kid. I was a Stone Temple Pilots kid. But that sort of gateways you into louder and heavier stuff.
Yeah. Was there a pivotal moment for you where you're like, okay, I'm listening to just whatever my parents have on, and then what was that first thing that hit you where you were like, holy shit, there's something for me, or music's going to be a big part of my life. I want to try this.
Okay. Yeah. So, as somebody that in his adult life spends very little time listening to the radio, right? I have like one AM radio station that I really like because it plays like doo-wop that my parents listened to when I was a kid. So like nice. That, like that, every once in a while that works for me. But yeah, when I was younger, like preteen, early teens, we had just like a modern alt rock radio station, and it would just be playing like, it would just be Gin Blossoms, and like you'd have, the Toadies, or like just stuff from that era, Soul Asylum, you know what I mean? And it would just be me and my brother sitting in our room with the double tape deck, just like trying to catch the song on the radio so we could record it. Yeah. And it would just be like, these were the tunes that we sort of came up. It was like Empire Records kids, you know what I mean? Like the coolest thing in the world would have been to work at that record store from that movie, you know what I mean? Because that was just what we were sunk into. Yeah, so for me, that's kind of the initial thing. Stone Temple Pilots, probably the first time I heard core, I would say it was the first thing that I really liked that my mom did not like, probably. You know what I mean? That probably starts me on the path more than anything else does. STP, or weirdly enough.
So you head down the grunge path.
And then, of course, like the cool thing about the grunge path is that retroactively, when you're a little bit older, especially when you're my age, when you're old but not quite old enough to have been hip to it, it's like you get to look back and be like, oh, what was even better was the Pixies, or like stuff like that, where you're just like, oh, that was before that, and it's even cooler. And you'd be like, what about that band, they were super cool, all these other proto grunge, like pre-grunge things that really worked for me. But it's the typical story of like you get into grunge, then it's like, well, you start having opinions about what Metallica records are good. You know what I mean? And then there, it starts to escalate from there pretty quickly. I'll never forget the first time I heard Napalm Death, which again, unfortunately and embarrassingly enough, I'm not old enough to have been introduced. It's not like Scum was my first Napalm Death record. The first thing I heard was Diatribes, and by that point they were like mostly just like a groove metal. It was a lot slower than what they were kind of famous for. But when I
honestly barely ever listened to them, so like I have no judgment here or really input from me.
Yeah, so I think that we had a Napalm Death happen, we had Obituary happen, we had At the Gates, Slaughter of the Soul was a big one. And by this point you're not hearing this is not stuff that you're hearing on your standard radio hit radio, but I was lucky enough, me and my brother, we were lucky enough to have Seton Hall, which I think is a college in New Jersey. They had a legit pirate radio station that they did all day was play just this sort of kind of underground stuff. So as you're fooling around on the dial, and you're in these gateway groups, you're past grunge now, and you're getting a little heavier, you turn the dial and all of a sudden it's like you hear the Slaughter of the Soul on the radio, and it's this weird like college pirate radio station, and then that's the new thing that we're sitting there with the tape deck,
Right.
record, and at that point it's like, well, now we got our own, like, we're older and we've got jobs and we've got our own walking around money, and we can, let's go out, we can buy these records, and we can dive much more deeply into any of it. You become an album guy then. That to me is the big defining moment to me isn't so much like what was the first thing where you broke away from your parents' taste in music, but more like what made you an album guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
What made you an album guy?
Yep. More than just, okay, I hear a song and like it. Like I remember laying on the floor on my stomach in front of the boombox, like going through the CD booklets and listening to it start to finish, and then starting it over and going, holy shit, like, how do I make this sound? Like, what the hell was that?
Right.
What was your first like album that did that for you, where you're like start to finish?
So in the midst of all of that stuff, well, if we go back a little bit, because I'll say, if we go back a little bit, I had a lot of the grunge albums, but the grunge largely happened while I was kind of on the young side, and maybe not young enough, but I'm the oldest child. So a lot of times you're the experiment when you're the oldest child, and you're the one that I think your parents are a little more protective of and a little more critical of everything. So maybe it's not that I wasn't old enough for it yet, but I think that being the first one out, my parents probably felt like I wasn't old enough to consume that stuff fully unsupervised. In retrospect, after listening to some of it, they were probably right. But the first stuff that we're buying unsupervised, where nobody really cares anymore, and we're just buying the records that we want to buy. This will bring it back full circle, is that we're getting those earlier Sepultura records, right? And so possibly even before I realized that I was going to be a vocalist in a band, I noticed that more than any other aspect, I was being picky and persnickety about vocals, because I listened to Morbid Visions, right, which is the first Sepultura album, and I was just like, yeah, it's fast, it's cool, these vocals are dumb. And then I listened to the next album, and I was like, they're a little better, they're not as dumb. And then I listened to the next album, and it's like, oh, they're a little better. And then Arise, you get to Sepultura's Arise, and you're like, Max Cavalera is an animal on this album. This is amazing. Yeah. He sounds like a beast. And then Chaos AD, he sounds like a beast, right? And then Roots comes out. And because they released Roots, and it was essentially a nu metal album that was distilled down to just as aggressive and mean as a nu metal album could be without any other stuff. I heard that before I heard any other nu metal, and I was like, this stuff isn't... I just put this... If I'm going to do this, I may as well just put that Sepultura record back on, because at least it's killing me the whole time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's not a DJ and all this other shit happening.
No, there's not a DJ. There's no like pretty anything on it. There's no whimpering, for lack of a better term.
And crying and breathing into the mic. Yeah. After your take.
Yeah. There's much less of that. The irony, of course, is that I'm a big fan of my Brett on a recording. Like, I really love it now.
Oh, yeah.
I really love it now, but at that point, I wasn't here for it.
Yeah, I think I got into like Nirvana after Green Day. Green Day was probably first.
Sure.
And then, so it's just whatever was on TV, and the simpleton shit. Because I'm an only child, so I didn't have an older brother or anyone to like show me shit. And my mom listened to like whatever was on the radio, and she wasn't huge into music, so it was just like whatever I found. Oh, my friend gave me his Nimrod CD to borrow, and that's like my introduction. So I was late to everything. Heard Nirvana, I was like, this is sick. But then like you like starting to go down the heavier path, like, oh, Bleach, he's like screaming, like, oh yeah, okay, And then I hear Korn for the first time, and that was like it. And then Slipknot added the speed for me, and then that was
Right.
my introduction to heavy, fast metal, thinking they were the first to ever do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
When
Right.
I'm
Right.
16 years old. But yeah, so that's an interesting path. It's funny with just the age difference of 4 or 5 years, what that
Yeah.
can do.
It's wild. It's a game of inches with your
Yes.
age. You know, it's really wild. It's crazy. Like when you're younger, a 4-year difference is an eternity.
Yeah.
And then that fades as you get older until you look at this conversation and you're like, yeah, we were light years apart somehow. That's weird.
Yeah. Like 40 and 44 is not very different compared to like 18 and 14 or 18, like, yeah, that's
Exactly.
crazy.
It's crazy. It's wild.
So you started noticing, okay, I'm paying attention to vocals.
Yeah.
Did you have an inkling of like, oh, maybe I kind of want to try this, or how long did that take, or what was the spark that was like, okay, I want to pick up a mic and give this a shot?
I can tell you the exact listening moment that hit me, and then the exact conversation that happened that brought me into the fold of doing it. And the exact listening moment was the aforementioned radio station, Seton Hall's Pirate Radio. They are playing through the usual stuff that I'm used to hearing. You get your Fear Factories, you've got those first 2 Fear Factory albums. Let's get real for a second, right? I mean,
yeah, I never liked the vocals, but the drums and guitar always got me going.
it's like literally a machine. I know that's what they're going for. So, congratulations, success. Yeah. The usual stuff, and then they play Element by Vision of Disorder, which was just like a Long Island hardcore band that I had never heard of before. And it sort of opens with this sort of like syncopated drum pattern riff on top of it. And he's sort of singing, right? And then it hits a hard stop, and then everything kicks in all at once, and he lets rip this like insane opening salvo of a scream. And it's not a bark or a growl or something super guttural or anything like that. It's literally like somebody's stabbing him to death or something. And it's like big scream. And on the heels of hearing that, I'm having conversations with my brother and our neighbor down the street, Thomas, and they're talking about, and they're the same age, so they're 2 or 3 years younger than me, and they're talking about wanting to start a band. And Thomas got a drum set, and nobody, he doesn't know how to play it or anything like that. My brother played the cello in band, like in school. And he was talking about, well, I could probably pick up bass guitar pretty easy if I ever play cello, So the conversation was, he was trying to figure out how to pay for a bass and gear, like to start this group with our neighbor. And I have no discernible musical acumen, not in any real way. But I like hanging out with my brother and my friends. And I was working at the time. Most old people will tell you, we started working young. So I got my first job when I was 11, and it was a paper route, and I've been working ever since. So needless to say, I'm ready to be retired now. I'm done. So I had a little money in my pocket, and I was looking for an excuse to spend it. And he asked to borrow some money so he could buy a bass and like a modest rig. And I said, you can have it if I can be in the band. And he said, well, what are you going to do in the band? I said, I don't know, maybe I'll just be the singer. And that's how it started.
Wow. Okay. That's
kids.
cool.
We're kids, young teenagers at the time. So, that's how that started. Me like weirdly tagging along to my younger brother's ambition to like play in a band.
What kind of music was it?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea. We had one. We didn't have it. We never made it through an entire song. Is this initial like iteration? I couldn't remember the name of the group. to save my life. I don't know what it was attempting to be. I feel like maybe like we all really liked, the aforementioned stuff, but none of us had any kind of capability whatsoever. So it was all
right.
Yeah. Tom doesn't even know how to play the drums. You know what I mean? This is the drummer for Sawtooth. This is the guy that would play drums on those first records. So
okay.
We had no idea. Yeah. The three of us, we had no idea what we were doing. So,
So were you starting to like yell a little bit and just kind of fuck around or trying to sing or what?
Yeah. It was very much a shout, like an attempt to be tough and a shout more than anything else. There was no real intent of trying to sound like anything in particular, which is it's a trend that you'll notice throughout this conversation will continue for me.
Yeah.
There's no real. So it really, if I'm being honest with you, and anytime anybody ever asks me about what it is I do in the band now and what I've sort of become kind of known for, it started there, and it's just, I just kept doing it until it eventually sounded like what it sounds like over years and years and years of practicing in our basement and then his basement and then that basement and then, whatever it is. It just kind of happened over time. There was no education to it. There was no,
you didn't deliberately plan to like go that direction. It's just what happened.
It just became what was comfortable. And so that's where it went,
Yeah. You found your unique sound. Which I went and listened to like everything you guys have out on streaming today. And, I was like, blown away by, because I had probably not heard it in God knows how long, Cuddle Monster.
Right.
And the production is so good for that era, for this kind of music. Like usually it's just total crap. Right. And like it holds up to this day. Like I listened to it today and I have on these monitors I have, and they're pretty good. They're like Yamaha, whatever. Like, holy shit, this sounds fantastic. Like, where did you guys record that?
We recorded Cuddle Monster at Stained Glass Studios with Jason DeZuzio in Paramus, New Jersey. Stained Glass Studios was a room in probably his house or his mother's house or whatever it was, like a repurposed bedroom that he built a studio in. He is actually, Jay DeZuzio is like at this point, a very successful producer in Hollywood. I feel like he just does like a lot of soundtrack stuff now.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But his big claim to fame at the time, he'd never recorded anything loud like how we were loud, but he did that first Coheed record, Coheed and Cambria. So that was his big claim. His big claim to fame was that he recorded that first Coheed record. So we were like this weird little experiment for him, I guess. We didn't have any idea what we were doing when we went in there. We didn't have any, and I don't know that he had an idea of how to deal with a group like us. So this is weird, like marriage of kind of fumbling around trying to find the way, and also, if I'm being totally honest, like you're talking about a group of very, at the time, especially very, spite driven, individuals, all of us in our early 20s, very, very much driven by the ethos of what is everybody else doing? We are not doing any of that. We're not doing it. We're not doing it. What are people tuning to? We're not doing it. We're standard E. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like Jay, we had to talk him out of tuning up from standard E. Like we had to talk him. Yeah. Like we were just, what am I like? What are these dudes playing on? Like, I'm going to play on a Telecaster. Like, we're not going to put a ton of distortion. It's not, it's all going to be, and I think that the long-term effect of that being that, like, we hear fairly often that we were influential for X, Y, and Z, and that's all well and good. But at the time, our sort of spiteful decision making, coupled with our inability, even at that age, our inability to be as like road dog active as other bands were trying to be, was just like, not a single shred of professional attention from any legitimate record label or financial backing or anything that you would actually need in the very early 2000s to survive as a band. We just didn't. We didn't have. We never.
So you think it was because you weren't trying to be road warriors?
That's part of it. That's a huge part of it, because we couldn't. Like we were already all working, or some of us were in school, and it was one of those things where some of us were already paying rent to live.
Yeah.
Like, it was just one of those things where if we had all rallied and abandoned other pursuits and maybe got a house together, the four of us, and given up on anything else, then we could have possibly made that. And we played out as much as we possibly could. But by and large, we were a relatively regional act. But I think probably that, coupled with the much bigger factor of being just a total obnoxious ear sore of a band, that, like you said, I mean, there wasn't a ton of groups that were kind of doing it at the time.
Yeah, and if you're like kind of making it with like a fuck you, we're gonna do the opposite mentality, purposely not trying to be listenable or do whatever the trends are, and knowing you're gonna we might not make any money because we're doing this, but that's what we want, to throw your whole life away on that and go, now let's go on tour with this music we're deliberately writing to be the opposite of what everyone's doing. That's a lot. Yeah.
And if I'm being totally honest with you, it is kind of still where we're at. You know what I mean? Like, all these years later, it's kind of still what our headspace is. It's kind of still there's more current stuff that I like now than there's ever been, especially now that I'm past my Dylan era. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of just hating everything and hating everyone. And I'm like my loud, obnoxious music dad era, where I want to be everyone's friend and nice. So there's so much that I like now, but I still, when it comes to creating, I still am just no, shut it down, shut all of the, I don't want to hear what everybody else is doing. I don't want to know what everybody else is doing right now. We are writing, and it cannot be like what everybody else is doing. We're just we're on a principle allergic to it. So
yeah, well, that's great. I can relate to that a lot, because in Robinson, it was the same kind of thing. And it took a while for that to rub off on me from the other guys. Cause I come in with my new metal shit, and it's I like Korn, Slipknot. And they're like, that's great. Here's Converge, here's Dillinger, here's, listen to all this shit. And, so we start going down that road where metalcore sound like everybody. And then it just hit this point where Jeremy was like, fuck that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do breakdowns. And I was like, why? Breakdowns are sick. But eventually it caught up with me, and I was 18, 19. I was like, yeah, fuck what everyone's doing. Let's be as gross as possible and make everyone angry, and hopefully people hate it, and fuck them. And so, that reminded me a lot of that.
If you are, I said this to somebody the other day, and I believe it, and trying to find the best way to articulate it, but pretension doesn't have to be a 4-letter word. Oh, it's pretentious. It's well, yeah, you can wield pretension as a filter to ensure what you're doing is of a certain quality. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
If you are not being self-serving with your art, and then just relying on that somebody out there will be like-minded enough to understand where you're coming from, or to have their own understanding of where you're coming from. Because once it's out there, it's not just yours, it's everybody's, right? So if they can come to their own conclusion on it and their own reason to fall in love with something, then that is the only authentic way to cultivate a following, right? I mean, like that's, I don't know. To me, that's the only thing I can wrap my head around.
Yeah, at least a genuine following where you're doing it for you and for you only. And if other people happen to like it and that works out, then great. But at least you 100% genuinely went into it with like, this is just for me or for us. And we're doing exactly how we want. And we don't care what anyone says.
And then the cool thing is that if you came along with us, well, you're with us. Like you're in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're in it with us. And that's like, we really love you for that and appreciate that.
That makes it cooler for everyone.
Oh God.
Fans and band together. Like you're a part of this thing. You're like, yeah, well, fuck all these people. Like this is our thing, our little corner of the world. And
100%.
Who cares if we get paid for it? And then you get older and you're like, man, I wish I would have played some simple shit, made some money.
Oh my God, dude. Well, I can't say that I've been pushed to the point of that sentiment, but the sentiment that I do have, the prevailing sentiment, I'm not alone. The whole group sort of feels that way, or this way, I should say, is that it just needs to cover its own expenses.
Yeah. That's where we're at too.
If the bank can pay for its own existence, then that's all I care about. I don't care about anything else,
Yeah.
That's it. So.
And back then, like, that was it was really hard to do even then. Like, especially playing this kind of music, which was like still basically brand new in the grand scheme of things. And you're lucky to play a house show for 20 people. A couple of them buy a shirt, you get some gas money,
right,
and move on to the next whatever the hell you were able to pull out of MySpace.
I'll tell you what though, that's my favorite gig though. Like that house show,
the best.
That house show is my favorite gig. Like you can, I don't care. I don't care. I mean, I know that we need we've priced ourselves out of a lot of these house show opportunities, unfortunately, because we do have to survive if we're going to, we're a rare live performance. I know you've talked a lot about, From a Sex and Story Window being, as you guys go forward, being, like a part-time type of thing, and it being a similar type of situation. Y'all are busy. Y'all got lives. A lot of y'all got kids. Everybody's got a job. You know what I mean? So it's the same situation. At the end of the day, here's kind of, is there a world where you could be making music full time and that's your job? Yes. But this isn't it. That's a different version of this band, and it's not one I want to be in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
for sure.
That's not we're not making what we're making and achieving that level of more socially agreed upon success.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to take a project that far off the rails just for that. I'd rather just be a hired gun for someone who's already doing that. If I just want to play guitar and get paid for it, then I'll go fill in for Bring Me the Horizon or something,
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. Play the biggest stages, get paid more than our entire band did ever, probably for a couple of weeks.
100%.
That would be fun to experience the opposite side of things, because the biggest show we ever played was Furnace Fest, I think, last year.
It's huge.
Yeah. And that was like a bucket list for me, to play a giant outdoor festival in the summer during the day, just that whole different atmosphere. And I got to do it when I was 39 years old, which is crazy.
How many people show up to that dang thing?
Total throughout the weekend, I looked it up. It was 10 to 15,000. When we played, they for some reason were you're going to open the main stage, and we're we shit our pants, and we're sound checking after the doors are open, and we're I don't know if no one's going to come over or it's going to fill in. And there was nobody there when we finished our sound check. There's 2 other stages, I think, going. And then by the time we started, it was full, 2,000 people, maybe 3,000 max, but just front to back of this whole area filled in and giant pit. I was just holy shit, that was crazy. So
massive.
Even if we just did that and called it a day after that for this reunion run, I would have been so happy.
Well, I will say congratulations on not calling it at just that.
Thank you.
and coming back and gracing us with a ripper of the new tune and more to come.
Thank
Feel really
you.
good about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that all kind of happened on accident, and like Will decided to step down after that, which is like your perfect last show at, if we're going to be doing it again like this. And then
Sure.
Sean came back and we did the more grindier thing, and yeah, just we'll see where it goes from here. But I see at least like playing shows this year, and maybe we'll hang it up in 2026. I don't know, but it's just we didn't want to put an end to it, because like as long as we're having fun and it's not like, oh, we got to do this and get away from the jobs and kids and it becomes a hassle. You don't want that.
You don't want that. It can't feel like a job. I mean,
No,
can't feel like a job. We got it. Like,
especially when it takes so much for everyone at this age to get together and practice and write new stuff. I'm sure it's the same for you guys. Like,
forget it. Yeah, completely insane. Completely insane. Yeah.
well, so you guys, sorry, go ahead.
No, you got it. I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunity to talk about the very sort of roundabout, borderline convoluted way we have to approach that we have to take for piecing things together.
Right. Well, I was going to say, like, so you dropped Cuddle Monster.
Yes.
And that was obviously a big success for you, but you didn't do a lot of touring off it.
No. Cuddle Monster. All right. So Cuddle Monster, yes, a huge success.
Well, the way it's praised by everybody today, I would say yes, it is.
All right. So so if it's important to context is key, I think. So it's important to put yourself back into the day and age to 2001. We have very little cachet, very little clout. A friend of ours created a record label for the sake of putting that album out for us, and promptly did nothing else ever again.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Dead by 1918 Records is our buddy Keith Rinaldi, who started that label to put Cuddle Monster out. I'm sure that his intention was to probably do more after that, but he just didn't. It is what it is. And I know he took a loss on that album as well. And I 100%, and this will be an important fact to remember, that this band 100% sat on copies of that CD until we came back 2 years ago. So, all right, important to note when talking about our decision making once we did come back, how we went about putting things out and so on and so forth. It's important to note that we spent 20 years not being able to give those dang things away. So, no.
A guy said the same thing. He had a bedroom full of CDs. He still has to this day.
Exactly. Yeah. It's everybody's living on their own personal, garbage heap of plastic. You can't really do anything with it, so we put out Cuddle Monster. We didn't tour the world on it. We did tour a chunk of the country after it. Nothing crazy. We went all up and down America and out to the middle of it roughly, and kind of hit all that. We never made it out west or anything like that. We did play Ohio a bunch of times. One of our favorite places to play was Ohio. But
great scene of angry kids here for sure.
About to say, you guys have so much anger there. Just the weather? What is it?
Definitely the weather, and just like a hollowed out city of Youngstown, at least here, old steel industry, and then it's dark and gloomy from October through March or May, and it's cold as shit. 7 inches of snow on the ground right now that just showed up overnight. Almost. It was 37 degrees yesterday when I went into practice, and raining. And then when I came out, it was snowing. So it dropped in the middle of the day when it usually would get warmer.
Right.
So by this point, you're like, fuck everything. I just want to see the sun and feel warm. So that, and there's like nothing to do. There's no jobs. Like, so yeah, everyone's just pissed off except for like that short amount of time in the summer when it's beautiful.
And then you're lucky enough to be in town and you play in somebody's weird little basement and they pack like 50 kids in there, and it is like everybody goes crazy. And
yes,
there's people spilling beer all over the place, and it's like
that sounds exactly like every party I ever went to from 18 to through my college years.
There you go. Yeah,
that's
so
Ohio.
We did a lot of that. We did a lot of like weekend warrior stuff, long weekend stuff. We did a couple of week-long stints. We did a couple of 2-week stints. We went out. Our first time out was with Number 12, who were our sort of brothers in arms, for lack of a better term. They started around the same time that we did, and we kind of found each other early. My brother would end up splitting off into another band called the Heatherton Heatwave that he was in with John Carroll, actually, who plays drums for us now. And so we would play a lot with them. We'd play a lot with From a Second Story Window back in the day. We played a lot with like Knife That Glitter back in the day.
Oh, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Right. And we would play probably more times than we should have played with Coheed and Cambria. Almost all the times we play with Coheed and Cambria. It's so weird,
That's awesome, though.
They were from the area and they were nice guys, and we wound up on some actually pretty cool bills with them. So small stuff. So you see those guys. You talk about a stadium band, like that would be the prime example of a band that made it super big that we came up with and played a lot of the same gigs in the local area.
That's awesome.
West Nyack, New York. They just put out a video for a new song that I think is, I don't know if it's actually shot there, but it is at least made to look like it's shot at Olives in Nyack, New York, which is the bar that all of our bands would play at all the time. So
that's cool.
Pretty cool that they did that. Yeah. So little West Nyack,
Yeah, they headlined one of the Furnace Fest dates. Not the day we were playing, but they've been huge for so long now. I remember hearing them for the first time in college. What's the record? Their second or third one? Something is it Keeping Secrets? Silent Earth, that one?
Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth or something like that. Yeah, I'm admittedly a lapsed enthusiast.
That's like the 3 semesters I spent in college before I dropped out to go on tour. That's what that record reminds me of.
Right.
That era. My friend Heidi listened to all the time. But yeah, okay. So you guys did Cuddle Monster 2001, and then you did all that Weekend Warrior touring, all that kind of stuff. But you had a 3-song EP, right?
Well, we were going to. Actually, the plan was for it to be a full length, and we had a very troubled sort of writing cycle. A lot of very big lineup changes, key lineup changes, a lot of shakeups within the group, unavoidable stuff. And then what we ended up doing was with like what Persian War was going to be was this big narrative sort of record that we had planned that was going to really tell a story from beginning to end. And we knew that we weren't going to be able to afford to do that. So we recorded 3 tunes, and the idea was, let's shop them around like idiots. Let's shop them around a little bit and see if we can get any traction. You know what I mean? This nobody band, members dropping left and right out of the group, and they don't tour, and they sound awful on purpose. Like, and
it's worth a shot, though. If you can't afford it, you want to do that,
dude. We sent that thing to probably every, all of the usual suspects from the era, and without getting too into it, I will say that the response from all of the usual suspects of the era was at best silence, and at worst, a little hateful and derogatory towards us. That's okay.
Damn.
Water under the bridge. It's 2025. I don't care. No big deal. But anyway, we are getting older. We are pulling apart from each other. Everybody in the group kind of all agrees that if we can't make something happen with these 3 tunes as far as getting them out there and getting them, like getting picked up by somebody, then we can't really afford to keep doing it. We may as well move on with our lives. And so that's kind of what ended up happening, is we ended up splitting, and it really came from a conversation that we had just talking about the hypothetical thing that each of us would be doing if we weren't doing the band. And that's when it was sort of decided, well, let's just do that stuff then. Like, what are we, every label hates us or won't talk to us. And nobody really likes what we're doing. So let's just die. Let's just die a peaceful death and move on with our lives. So that's what we did. That's what we did. I moved from New York to North Carolina. I've been down here ever since. That's where I'm at now, in Raleigh, North Carolina. And, just built my life down here. My wife, she moved down with me. We had started dating while I was still up there. So we've been together for forever now at this point. She's been in the trenches.
Yeah.
But it's one of those stories where I, despite the very real fact that, occasionally we got to play like a packed VFW in Jersey, but that's just Jersey. You know what I mean? Or we got to open for this cool band. We got to open for Ed Gein in like Poughkeepsie, like New York. And that was great. You know what I mean? But it's like, we didn't, like, on our own merits, nothing was getting accomplished. You know what I mean? Nothing. So
it's funny how the appearances from the outside, like a name can carry all this, weight with it. And then, but to the band itself, you're like, we're not doing shit. We're not making money. Like, we can't get anyone to help us out.
Nothing. No. Yeah. We can't afford to do it and nobody will help. So that's it. I moved down here. It's not too long before I get the itch to, make music again. And something that you got to keep in mind about Sawtooth is, kings of not doing ourselves any favors, right? We're talking about, like, everybody starts talking about MySpace around this time. We didn't have a MySpace, like, on purpose. We were like, no.
Did you never have one?
No, Sawtooth never had a MySpace. Sawtooth
wow, that's awesome.
Never had a MySpace. Is it? I don't know. Maybe we would have done better.
I don't know. Like, we used it to mainly like book our own tours. I don't know how much that grew our band. Maybe it did, but like from a second story window was doing way better on MySpace than Robinson. Like, I remember using it to, like, we've put out like we want to book this tour in all the cities, and then like someone book us, and then we just say book us here, and I'd fill them in as people would email us or whatever. And
so you use it as like a little bit of like a networking tool.
Yeah, it was basically our website, because like no one went to your website. They still don't to this day. They go to your Instagram or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you don't even need one. I mean, people have one, just, they have one.
Yeah. But I made us one just because I thought we should, but I'm like, I'm also an old guy coming back 15 years later going, what do bands do?
They set up a link tree. You set up a link tree that just goes to all the different things.
I figured that out. We have one of those now.
Yeah. That's what the kids are doing, I think, is link tree, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I'm down here. What's the word? I meet up with some guys, or I message some guys on MySpace because I've finally given in. We're lonely. We're new in town. Let me get a MySpace going. You know what I mean? So I'm on there. I discover a local band in Raleigh that they don't have a name, and they're just called like, drummer and singer wanted, or whatever it is. And they've got a couple of tracks that are kind of up, and it's just like this crazy, super techy, like drum machine metal, that is super wild. And, I said, oh, I like that. I wonder if they're still looking for a singer. So I just messaged them. And, this was the first time this was really the first time that I had ever reaped the benefits of any sort of perceived like Sawtooth clout, because I'd reached out to those dudes and I was just said, my name's Rich, blah, blah, blah. I was in the Sawtooth Grin. Blah, blah, blah. Do you guys still need a vocalist? And they wrote back, they're like, you're in the band. That's we're like, well,
beautiful.
You haven't met me. Like, are you sure? Is that like what? So I met them at a practice space, and they met me by handing me the key to the practice space and saying, let's get a practice.
Wow.
Let's go. And so we had I was terrible first practice. I was terrible. You only know the tune so much and you're riffing the entire time. But to their credit, they didn't immediately kick me out. That was the group that went on to become Vocal Kiss, and we put that album out Easter. And that's one of those groups that was a band that I think could have, in the moment, found the type of support that it needed to go further. You know what I mean?
I agree. I listened to that today, too, and I forgot it was a drum machine. I was like, this is a drum machine.
Yeah.
But for way back then, that was like different.
It's crazy. Yeah, it was crazy back then. Well, to use it the way we were using it, especially because I think that the way we were programming it, it was not necessarily programmed so that a human being could turn around and do it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that there was songwriting and structure and intricacies, and it wasn't just copy and paste one part. Like they took the time and effort to sort of curate the drum experience so that even if we couldn't find somebody that could play it, at least it wasn't an area that was necessarily lacking. At least it was like a feature, not a defect,
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Was it because they couldn't find a drummer? They're like, let's try this. Or was it a deliberate, like, we want to be a drum machine band to be different?
I think they initially wanted a drummer, and then it became evident that it wasn't going to work out, at least locally. Okay. Anybody that ever tried out for the group and made any meaningful progress was from out of town.
Yeah.
Jimmy Blastbeats actually was in the group for a hot minute, believe it or not.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's a funny story.
Oh, I remember that too, looking at his credits, trying to he's been in so many goddamn bands.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a bud.
What year was this? This was...
Yeah, you're talking, I'm down here in 2005, so 2005, 2006. So now I'm starting to have my head on a swivel for all of these like MySpace bands now, you know what I mean? And I'm checking out all the different groups that are popping up in that moment, and I'm saying, we could do something with like Me and Him Call It Us. We could do something with these Robinson Cats. We could do something with, like Destroyer. There's all these different bands that are popping up, and it's all those DeBello bands or whatever,
Yeah.
And that's in keeping up with my personal music trajectory, that's a guy I think that we even reached out to, is the DeBello guy.
Oh, Jean. Yeah.
I think we reached out to that dude, and I think the conversation went something along the lines of this. Hey, we'd like to work with you. And he was like, I'd like to work with you guys. And then we were like, cool, we'd like to work with you. And then he was like, I'd like to work with you guys. And then we were like, we'd like to work with you. And then he was like, yeah, I'd like to work with you guys. And then we were like, well, we're recording right now, because we self-recorded that album. We did that ourselves because one of our guys in the group is an engineer. So he just did it all himself. And so we're like, we're recording and we want to do it. And he's like, yeah, that sounds good. But there was never any movement past that station. Meanwhile, Arclight Communications, which was just like this upstart, again, another thing where I'm not sure what he did beyond put out the CK album, but he was like, hi, this is my name, this is my label, this is what I can offer you, this is my distribution deals, this is blah, 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 and here's some paperwork if you want to work together. I'm ready to go as soon as you're done recording, and I'm ready to go. And we were like, yep, let's go.
Wow.
So
that's awesome.
In a sense, it was a little more substantial than our buddy doing the Dead by 1918. But long term, I probably nowhere near like the clout or the cachet that would have come with, working with like a more established label of the time. You know what I mean? it is what it is, you know.
Yeah, I would have loved if we could have played with you guys on like when DeBello they hit us up. I think it was like 2006 or maybe the end of 2005. I can't remember. I could be completely wrong, but I remember we got signed. I don't remember if we actually signed anything. It was like official, you know, like handshake and a carton of cigarettes. But
Right.
we did like go out there and meet him for the first time, and he did our one full length, and that was it. But he did bring out a 30-pack of Budweiser and a carton of Camel Wides. That was like our signing bonus.
Oh my God.
And we played a show with like Destroyer, and he was like, "Welcome to the label." We're like, "Thanks." And then he put it out, and it started blowing up. I think it got bigger after I left the band and we broke up. I think they got more well known, but
Sure.
it was cool to be a part of anything because we were kind of the same way, like sending out shit, and we wanted to be on Black Market because From a Second Story Window was, and we were from the same area and best friends, and no answer there. So we're like, okay, like where else can we go? But we were the same thing, like let's be as anti everything as possible. So
Right.
I think it was a little early for both of us, maybe doing that kind of shit. And then
It's gotta be. Yeah.
yeah,
You're a little ahead of the curve. You can be a little ahead and it's great for like I'm finding out it's great for that sort of retroactive long-term sort of like, you know, lore building.
yeah.
So,
That's why when I say like Cuddle Monster was a huge success, like you laugh, but like when I hear about this, like for the lore and for everyone, like, oh, they're the pioneers, they're pre-MySpace, like that's insane. Like, and then for me, like I was even on the outside then, like I had heard you guys, but you were gone by the time we were really doing anything substantial. And so it was kind of like, ooh, who were they? Like these like legends of grindcore or mathcore, whatever you call it. And
it's almost
even then
better that
like,
we died. It's almost better that we died, you know?
yeah, it creates a, like, you're like a legend.
Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah. And like then too, like we were still on the, like we broke up before MySpace really became MySpace, like 06, 7, 8, 9, 10 with like the deathcore bands and that whole new wave of like the next generation of shit.
Right.
But at the time I'm like, well, I don't even know what, like I'd heard the term grindcore, but then the real grindcore people were like, you're not grindcore. So I'm like, okay, like I don't know. But and they're like, you're this or that. Like, I don't care. It's just heavy music. It's I don't know. Like who cares?
Yes.
I hate genre. I still do.
All right. So I'm so glad that you brought this up because I've been thinking a lot about genre lately, or as Alex Trebek would say, genre. Rest in peace, Alex. No, I've been thinking a lot about genre lately. I do believe wholeheartedly that genre, cross-genre pollination, subgenres, X, Y, and Z, very, very important for critical appraisal and for fan bases to find their thing. You know what I mean? But I also think that it is equally as important for bands to completely ignore those conversations and just do what they want to do.
I think that makes sense. It is kind of more of a fan side thing, so they can
categorize
and discuss and be like, well, they're this. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you know, something that I've seen a lot of groups get sort of sucked into, and I'm going to use a really big band as an example so as not to talk trash about anybody's catalog. All right. But like when I was a young guy, back to when I was late middle school or, you know, whatever, Soundgarden, Super Unknown, big, massive grunge crossover extravaganza, you know, hugely important, hugely influential, a little too long on repeat listen, if I'm being totally honest with you. But nevertheless, that can't diminish its importance and its greatness. Big album, constantly classified in the press, and come award season when they were winning tons of things, constantly classified as a metal album, heavy metal, right? And so every single time Soundgarden would accept an award or would address the public or be interviewed or so on and so forth, they would constantly iterate and reiterate the fact that they were not a metal band. We're not a metal band. We're not a metal band. I don't know how we won this. We're not a metal band. Yada, 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 so on and so forth. So that the next album that they put out, Down on the Upside was the name of that album, they proved that they're not a metal band by shedding those elements that people were using to attach them to a genre that they didn't feel connected to.
Mm-hmm.
My problem is that an earnest reason to shed an element of your sound? Or is that your spite coming up? You know what I mean? Yeah. And I use that. I can't hurt Soundgarden, so I use them as an example. But you see this constantly in these little sort of pockets of subgenres of extreme music, underground music, all these different things. Well, we really should just be feeling free to create exactly what we want to create and put a lot of that conversation out of our heads as creators. We're just here making art, right? I mean, that's all anybody's doing, right? That's what, in a perfect world, that's what we're doing, is just kind of making art. And it should be what you want. It should be what you, the creator, wants. And it should be it should exist outside of that sort of, echo chamber genre conversation, this constant cycle of people classifying you and reclassifying you and all that kind of stuff. Again, important for them, important on that end of the spectrum, important for the fans, important for critical analysis, depth of creativity for the person that's actually making it, though.
Yeah, I think for smaller bands like us, we don't have to worry about it as much. But when you're Soundgarden level, every decision you make is a business decision.
Yes, yeah.
So
true.
They could get more spooked by something like, oh, we don't want to piss off the metalheads. We're let's be clear we're this, and then that's going to affect them when they go into the room to write, and they're thinking about we don't want to make people mad. We don't want to bomb with a record. We still got to make money and get the bills paid. When for us, it's what money? Fuck you. We're going to do it. Yeah, it's much easier for smaller bands to not care. But
you're right.
Some are going to regardless because they're an ego thing.
Yeah, it is an ego thing, and it's hard not to fall into that trap. It really, really is. It's really hard not to fall into that trap. We've circled the drain on it several times over the course of our, of our sort of journey of making music and making art. Where we have to kind of step back and remind ourselves, wait, pump the brakes. Let's just let's close ranks and focus on what we're trying to do and not worry about all this exterior, That's all you can do,
So I was trying to figure out, but the internet, you can never trust anything. When you broke up in 2004,
right?
And then when was your first attempt at coming back to do anything? Because I read 2 different years and 2 different things. I'm I don't know what's real.
Great question. So we early 2010s, I'll say, because my memories made a Swiss cheese. Early 2010s, 2010, 2012, we make the attempt to rekindle the group, right? And this is for the first time. This is me and Jay, and for the first time working with John Carroll on drums. Now, John is a friend of mine for as long as Sawtooth was around back in the day. When we met Jay at his first practice, we met John at Jay's second practice because he brought him along with him.
Okay.
They were
Jay's
friends.
Guitar?
Jay's our principal, our principal songwriter, guitar player.
Okay.
He's the one that authored Cuddle Monster, and so he is, he's back. He was back in the attempt in the 2010s, and he's with us now. Very cool. It's really a lot of the group, over time, even from then to now, is still pulled from kind of this core group of guys. weirdly, like we just kind of like can't escape each other.
Yeah.
It is what it is. It's cool.
So did you have like material that you guys have carried along this whole time?
All right. So when we were coming back in 2010, 2012 or whatever it was, we had basically some demos that we were working on. And we got to a point where 3 of the demos were finished enough, meaning everybody that was playing in the group at the time had an opportunity to record something, even if crudely, and kind of put it all together and put it out there online for people to hear. If we were avoidant of the internet in the early 2000s, we were on it too much during the 2010s. Like, this was a very public attempt to make a comeback. This was a very sort of like, we were out, like, none of us knew how to market ourselves or anything like that. We still don't. We're miserable at it. But
it's a mystery.
Oh God, it's a total mystery. None of us really understood how to do it. We were just online all the time, constantly interacting, constantly sort of back and forth with people, just very weird presence online. We would do a lot of like weird, like manufacturing feuds with bands we had never met, and like we're just picking fights with people. You know what I mean? Like, there was a lot of, because at the end of the day, we saw maybe an inkling of a demand for us to come back. You know what I mean? Because we'd spent the past like better part of a decade being told, actually, you guys were important. Actually, like, this was an important band. Actually, you guys were doing something cool. Actually, X, Y, and Z. And so, like, I think our attitude as we were coming back was like, well, then how come you let us die? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Very sort of deferment of blame, petulant child kind of attitude towards,
where were you?
Typical, like, we're like, and the whole approach lyrically even was the whole, like, those 3 tunes were literally like, cool, like, oh yeah, like, thanks for coming around. Where were you guys back when we were dying and face down in the dirt? You know what I mean? Whatever. And that was the approach. And those 3 songs that we put out there, just the demos, never went any further than that in the moment, because we spectacularly crashed and burned very publicly again. You know what I mean? Just like completely split at the seams, fell apart.
Where was this happening on the internet at the time? Was this Facebook, or Instagram was still like 2011 or 12 that came out, right?
This was a Facebook. This was a pretty exclusively Facebook implosion. Yeah, very public self-evisceration. We didn't. We just weren't. We weren't ready on an interpersonal level to emotionally bear the weight of being back, I think.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure what happened. There's a lot of craziness that happened there. But we failed spectacularly and then disappeared again. But keep these 3 songs in the back of your head. You know what I mean? These 3, like, basically it ended up being 3 completed songs and then like a sketch, like an outline of like a 4th song, and so we die again. We're gone, and nothing to show for it. Honestly, like, all of the demoing was sort of over the internet. We were able to all get together in a room maybe once or twice during the effort. It was dead in the water, basically. It was dead in the water. And so we all kind of disappeared from each other's lives, like really definitively disappeared from each other's lives for the next decade. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. I'm down here and I'm doing some small things here and there. I started a couple of different local groups in Raleigh with just friends of mine for the sake of staying with it, keeping up with it, and having fun with friends again. You know what I mean? And so I started a band called Snake Baptist with some buddies down here. And that was, the whole edict there was, what if Botch and Dead Guy were one band, but all the songs were really short? You know what I mean? So it's not like
Gotcha.
grind. It's not like super fast. It's very like sort of rhythmic and off kilter and very heavy on like part for part intricate song structure, but all like fragments. Like it's a minute and a half or it's a minute long or whatever it is, like small, you know. And then the other group that I did was a group called Old Painless, and that was the closest I've ever done to like a pure genre group where it was just borderline almost exclusively just a grindcore band.
Okay. I tried to look up Snake Baptist earlier, but I couldn't find anything. Is that not on streaming or anything?
Actually, if you go to the Wax Festival released all of that stuff on vinyl.
Oh, did it?
Yeah,
okay, sick. I'll have to check that out.
Couldn't believe that he wanted to, but he did. Crazy. So yeah, he did. Yeah, and so all of that stuff is it, and it's very. I'll tell you what, like Snake Baptist, I think it's weird because we did that through Wax Festival, and not to get ahead of myself, you know, because that's years later. But again, I'm surprised. I saw people get excited about it. I saw it sell out in 30 seconds. I saw everybody, you know, jump all, you know, this is my favorite X, Y, and Z, blah, 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 blah. Like, these are my favorite tunes on this, blah, blah, blah. I was like, man.
Yeah.
Raleigh, I'll tell you what, Raleigh, North Carolina, where we live, was not ready for that group in any meaningful way. Like, they were very sort of traditional genre purist here. Infuriatingly enough, like all anybody wants to do is play grind, like straight grind or power violence, and they don't want to do any exploration outside of that. Fortunately,
yeah,
is what it is. But Raleigh was much kinder to Old Painless in that regard because Old Painless was a lot closer to like a more straight up grindcore, and all of our lyrics were cartoonishly militant, straight edge. Lyrics as sort of like a little bit of a joke.
Yeah, that's funny. So you do these two projects.
Yeah.
Now is it correct that some of those 4 demos that you had made it onto Good, and more material you had, or what happened with Good?
All right, so here's sort of what happens in our absence. We start to see, as the years go on, you start to see like the vinyl boom, you know, like people are making records, and you know, and again, this is at this point, it's one of those things where it's like, it has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with anything that's going to affect us. You know, I mean, 7 inches have always been like a big thing throughout my entire, like, sort of, you know, salad days of playing in bands back when I was younger. You know, it was, oh, you get the new 7-inch, you get the, you know, yada, yada, yada. So people were always at least collecting those. You know, I don't feel like we didn't see a ton of bands releasing LPs back in the early 2000s.
No, yeah, 7-inch was like the cool thing, and I was like, I don't care. I want a CD.
I want a exactly. Give me one of those little 3-inch CDs. If you're gonna
right.
You know, like, let me break my car stereo with this little 7-inch, this 3-inch CD. But you know, everything kind of like comes around, and this weird like sawtooth feedback that I've gotten throughout the course of really any time I've done anything else has come in these weird like waves of appreciation. You know what I mean? Like as time goes, and it was just in the middle of one of those waves. Like me and a couple of the Pervivore era guys had done an interview with that great interview YouTube podcast from you know, around that time, that Sheep's Clothing.
Yeah.
You know, so we had done, shout out to Sheep's Clothing. So we had done a little bit of an interview with those guys, and you know, and that was the first time I had talked to anybody from the Sawtooth days since, you know, trying to come back. But this particular batch of that crew was even earlier than that. That was like I hadn't talked to them since Pervivore, the attempt to put that stuff out in like 2004. So just one of those things where it was like the last group to kind of be back in the day that was attempting to make something happen. And that's who we were able to get to for an interview. At the end of the day, part of that was because I didn't have a way to get in touch with Jay. I didn't have a way to get in touch with anybody else, you know, so you didn't know who was where or what, or where anybody was, that kind of thing. So fast forward a few years, and the Wax Vessel crew, Nick starts reaching out, I think, at that point. And I'm admittedly not really familiar with what he's doing. I'm not I don't have my ear to the ground on it. He sort of expresses to us that he's done a few of them at this point. A few of these records have come out, and he's shown us some pictures, or shown me some pictures. And I had said to him, I was like, that's great. I think that's cool. I don't care. If you want to, because he was like, I want to put out Cuddle Monster on vinyl, and we'll do a couple of hundred of them, and I'll throw you some bucks for it or whatever. And I was like, oh, cool. But I didn't know what, I think my initial headspace on it was that I didn't know legally, who had rights to the name.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't know, I knew it wasn't me. So I was like, I don't know who else you need to talk to get any additional feedback, any additional approval for doing this. I think Jay might be the one that has any trademark stuff for the name, the Sawtooth Grin. He might be the one that holds it. I couldn't begin to tell you how to get in touch with him, that sort of thing. And it was one of those things where the process of getting things squared away for the Cuddle Monster release is what got any of us back in touch with each other to begin with. So that's how we reconnected. And initially it was just that. It was cool, this cool thing is happening. It's good to hear from you again. The artwork is coming in and being passed around between a couple of us, and do we like it? How do we feel about it? This is what the records are going to look like, so on and so. Oh, by the way, do you want to do Pervivore too eventually? Yada, yada, yada. I was like, oh, yeah, sure, cool. So throughout all of this, what I didn't know is that Jay and John are trading files back and forth. They're yes-ending each other. You know what I mean? They're yes-ending. Jay will send a riff, John will send it back with drums. Jay will send a variation of it, John will, and they start changing it. Jay writes a fake riff to trick John into playing this drum part, and then Jay puts the real riff on it. That kind of thing. That kind of back genius. And forth. That's how, and that's when you work together for that long, and you're finally back together, and you've got
I love that so much. A fake riff to get him to play the part he wants.
That kind of thing. You start seeing that sort of, and so then Jay just reaches out to me and he's like, listen, John and I have been trading riffs back and forth, and we both agreed that we think that it could be Sawtooth. What do you think of that? And at the time, if I'm being totally honest, my walls are up. You know what I mean? We spectacularly destroyed ourselves last time. Very publicly. Super embarrassing. He said, listen, if you guys make a record, I'll do it. If you guys present a finished record in front of me, I'll do it. Okay? I was like, but we have to keep radio silent about this to the outside world. We cannot talk to people about it. We cannot promote that we're doing it. We can't go live on social media. We can't do
the opposite of last time.
It has to be the opposite of last time, because it has to get to the finish line. And because if it doesn't get to the finish line, I don't want anybody knowing we were doing it,
Yeah.
So, it's probably about 2018, 2019, where that conversation starts, And so we just chipping away, arranging, recomposing, all these riffs coming in,
But
get it. The critter?
Yeah.
Get you a
my
critter?
Cat. Yeah.
Oh.
It's my cat, Leon. He can't handle me sitting still for more than an hour or two.
Get in on it, Leon. What kind of cat is that?
We're not sure. I think he's got a little bit of ragamuffin in him. A little bit of what are the big cats called?
Maine Coon.
Maine Coon, yeah, a little bit of that. He's fluffy. His brother's not. They're brothers. Same litter, but look completely different.
We had a Maine Coon growing up whose name was Fred, and he was an axe murderer.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, he would just be outside, just kill anything.
As you can see, he's just a love sponge.
Pretty chill. I like that.
Yeah.
Now I'm on Cats. What were we talking? What were we talking about? I forgot.
We're working our way towards what the songs that made up Good. They were sending riffs back and forth, and then
So as far as old material goes that went into Good, there was a little bit, but it was nothing that was released as a full song demo during the Jabberwocky period back in 2010, because that was what it was going to be. Is we were working on a record. It was going to be called Jabberwocky in 2010, and that's what we were going to do, right? Like,
okay,
those were the tunes that we were working on, right?
Gotcha.
And so none of those tunes, we didn't take from riffs from those tunes. We didn't cannibalize those tunes at all. We had some other riffs that were floating around that were going to be part of that project that we had not found purpose for yet. And so that mixed in with the new stuff, we were able to curate like what we consider to be a full album's worth of material, which is essentially about 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which to me is the perfect length for an album to be, especially for the type of group that we're doing.
For sure. Yeah.
So, but the conversations kind of went from there, and it was one of those things where it was like we were kicking the riffs around, the things were materializing. The songwriting started coming a little quicker. You're talking about guys that are that much further into their relationship with music. That much further into there and coming back to it with enthusiasm, you know what I mean? Because you figure, Jay was not playing for a while during that break. John was not playing for a while. John he owned a restaurant at one point. He wasn't playing music. You know what I mean? Like, we had all kind of left it, for lack of a better term. But we started piecing it all together. And it was one of those things where I had set out from my perspective to do sort of a pithy, pissy, sort of snide, reaction to the pandemic. Because this was a lot of our writing process happened during that, right? And I think the attitude was, I think a lot of people struggled during that time, and I didn't feel that way, and I wanted to write a record about that, and that's where the title came from, which is pronounced Good.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, how what
do you mean by struggle or not?
Well, like, I think a lot of people socially, a lot of people economically, a lot of people emotionally struggled during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that I luckily didn't. And so initially, in the spirit of the band, and the spirit of the band being this sort of confrontational, caustic, giant middle finger, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was what the record was going to be about, But as the songs were coming together, as the songs were materializing, and the content of them carried such weight, carried such emotion in just melodically what these guys were accomplishing with these tunes, I had to change tactics. I had to tap into and find, like, my empathy. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Writing Good made me a better person. Like, it made me a better person because I just decided to honestly write a record about being like a suburban dad in a neighborhood, and the whole record is about being a suburban dad in a neighborhood. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
The whole record is like, there's a song on there about my apple tree. The opening song on that album is about my apple tree that's out front in the front yard. We have a song on there that's about the block parties that my neighborhood throws. Like, but I don't mean like, I was like, I need to earnestly mean it because these guys are coming so earnestly with like the material.
Yeah.
I have to try to be like an earnest and emotional human being.
Yeah. So it's like after a while hearing what they were working on, it brought you back to, okay, this is more than just a fun revisit. This is a full on, I want to put myself into it.
Much more so than I ever had in the past, because Cuddle Monster, for as much as people can, you can exalt it if you want. I mean, people praise it and it's fine. People love it. Plenty of people hate it, as they should. It's super obnoxious. But like that stuff, none of that stuff is written from an internal or emotional place. It's all just storytelling. You know what I mean? None of what I had done prior to coming back and doing these new Sawtooth records, none of it has been personal or emotional or anything like that. And it's just this new, I think becoming a dad. I don't know, like.
I listened to your
not waving my personal satisfaction in people's faces, but like wishing it for people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I listened to the whole discography today twice, I think, and I think Good was my favorite one.
I love that. All right. Chronologically, it's the newest one.
Like, is it okay?
No, it's that's wrong. I mean, we put out that EP.
Songs
this past year, but as far as like completely newly composed from the ground up material, it's the newest record.
Okay, so Jabberwocky is those old 4 demos, and that came out after that, though.
It sort of is. It sort of is. I'll explain, because that's, again, to go back under the hood on those songs, which we aggressively did, especially me. I completely rewrote, but with Good. It was one of those scenarios where we had, again, and I can't stress this enough. Record labels do not mess with the Sawtooth Grin. Period. They don't. We have never once in our career of making music, on and off, yada, yada, yada. And granted, okay, Good was a surprise. That was designed. So not a lot of people knew we were doing it, but nobody has ever come to us and expressed an interest in working with us. No record label.
So interesting to me. Yeah.
Never happened. It's never meaningfully happened. Okay. Until Wax Vessel was putting out our back catalog. Right. And so it's the scenario of, we've got new stuff. We're looking to do it. We are very prickly and particular about how we do anything. Who can we work with? And what's the story? You know what I mean? It's like nobody knows we're operating. Nobody knows we're doing it. But we're in contact with Nick, and we've worked with Wax Vessel before, and we're building a rapport with him. And we know he doesn't do new releases, but what if he did?
Yeah.
What would it look like? What would it be? He hadn't done one yet, right? So it was one of those scenarios where we just started blue sky conversation on it with him, hashing it out. What could it be? What would it be? Like, what are his criteria for the way he operates his label? They're public and they're known, and people being satisfied or dissatisfied with how he operates is sort of like hotly contested, so on and so forth. What of that experience do we need to preserve? Does he need to preserve, and do we need to preserve? Where can it expand? Because it's a new release. What can we do? Yeah. And how willing is everybody involved to do it the way we want to do it, and to not do anything we don't want to do? Right? So what record label can you pitch that sort of heat to and have them be like, yeah, cool. You know what I mean? You can't do it.
No one. This has got to be exactly how we want it. They're going to be like, well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, to tie back into our principal concern is preserving the art that we are making. Our primary goal is not to be bigger or be more popular or hit certain metrics or accomplish these other, like, we are playing a different game. You know what I mean? We are trying to build a catalog that we can be proud of. And that's the goal, you know, like that's everything else is in support of that goal. Right. So, you know, conversation was, can we do it? Yes, we can. This is how. Cool. Can we keep it a complete secret until the day it drops? Yes. Cool. Can we not promote it? Can we not X, Y, and Z? We don't want to do videos. We're not doing singles. We're not yet. All this kind of stuff. And it truly got to be like this, you know, and to the point where, you know how like with a record label, oftentimes it'll be like you get your stuff done, right? And then, great. It'll be out in 8 months or it'll be out in a year, or whatever it is.
That's the worst period too, when you're waiting for all that after you're doing all the work.
We've yet to do it. We've yet to do that with this situation. Like, it's literally been like we finish mastering it, and then in a couple of weeks it drops. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it drops as like a day one. You can hear it everywhere. You can hear it for free. You can download it off the Bandcamp. You can donate to us if you want, but otherwise it's free. You know what I mean? And then if you want to buy a record, you pre-order it, and when it drops, when they have them in hand, they'll send them. You know?
Yeah. And so you guys did unlimited pre-orders for 2 weeks, right? That's great. Yeah, that's the way to do it.
I think first Wax Festival dropped to do that. That might be wrong, but I'm almost positive because I think
it was because it was new.
Yeah, first new band.
He's willing to do that, but that's great because then no one can fucking complain anymore. You had your chance. There was like a limited one though, right? That was different.
Okay. So no one should complain.
Oh yeah, they will, no matter what.
They will. So the way it worked was basically this. There was a slew of limited ones, right? And then there were 2 variants that were the 2-week pre-order window that were open. But the way it works is with the limited ones, the way the limited ones work is the limited ones pay for the run. So, anybody out there that is sort of on the fence about whether or not they want to support an operation like Wax Vessel, which again, let me reiterate, is just 2 guys, you know what I mean?
Who don't take profit.
That are just doing it themselves, and they don't personally make any money. You know, by the time that person is considering buying that record, which is buying a normal priced record within a 2-week window of time, by the time they're at that stage, we're making that, like, that's our money. Like, he's like, Wax Vessel makes his money back in like 30 seconds. And then the rest of it is just, if you're buying a record, it's just going to us, you know? And why would I lie about that?
Yeah, it's fantastic. When he was on here and I understood him more and like why he does things the way he does, and like I was never against it or opposed to it. Right. Like the only thing in me was like, well, I'd like, a few more people to be able to get it if they, missed their chance or whatever. But he totally, completely sold me on why it should be the way it is. And I was like, I agree completely now. Like, I think it's awesome.
For these reissues, certainly. Right? Because at the end of the day, again, 20 years sitting on a handful of Cuddle Monster CDs. You know what I mean? I feel like when Good came out, like we had a handful to raffle off. You know what I mean? We still had a handful that we could raffle off to people or whatever it was, because the interest was peaked back up again. It's like, I'm not interested in sitting on a bunch of dead stock of something just because I have to, at any given point, be ready to provide something for somebody. I have more appreciation running through my body for anybody that has, that has gone along with us or kept our names in their mouth, for all these years. Undying love for that group of people, like that are out there. One day we'll fill a room with everybody and we'll have a gig and everybody can be at it. It'll be great. But
I think
I can't.
what he was saying, like, those are the people that this is for. The people that have listened to your record for the last 15 years when nobody's talking about you. You're a dead band. Like, it's not cool thing to talk about. The diehard fans that were the first ones that are there when you say, hey, we're going to come back and do a show, or we're going to come back and do this. It's for them, not the people on the outskirts who are like, oh, what are they doing? Like, I guess I want one. And yeah, it's for the people who are going to be there that day to buy it within that 30-second window. And that's, I was like, okay, I get it. Because those are the people that, you know, we want to say thank you to by coming back for this reunion, and it's for them.
But on the flip side, for me, that's why it was so important to, you know, to look on the other side of it. That's why it was so important for us when we started talking about making new music to have an option that was kind of hanging out there for that period of time.
Because, yeah, I like that for the new release for sure. Yeah.
I'm not in everybody's household. I'm not in everybody's wallet. I'm not, you know, like, you get paid when you get paid. You get, you know, there's 2 weeks feels like a reasonable amount of time to give somebody for like a pre-order window. I feel decent about that. Plus, you know, anything that we've released that's been a new release, we've like the band also get copies. We get copies of it to then also still sell. So I mean, I think that it's. I think that the way it's the way he markets it is a little adversarial, which I think is fun and funny and interesting, and I like it. I love Nick, and I love working with Nick. But I think it's a lot more like what just other record labels are doing now anyway, too. You know, these small runs. I mean,
any reservations I had before after talking to him, I was like, okay, I get it. I think it's neat.
Right.
It's pretty neat. And I don't collect vinyl anyway, so I'm like, who am I to have an opinion? Like, I'm a streaming guy. I'm guilty. Like, I'm just not a collector of anything in general. I don't like shit. I keep my place I love throwing things away. The most I have anything of is guitars.
See, I'm the opposite. I love to keep things forever. So that's probably why I don't really religiously collect records, because I know it would be a problem real fast. I'd have a problem so fast if I was like a record collector. So I try to keep it to
for sure.
Yeah. So we come back. It's a surprise, right? It's a big, like, surprise. We're back. Also, here's a whole new record, right? And
this was 2022.
2022, Halloween of 2022, and it is, I mean, it goes over pretty well. I feel pretty good about how it was received. I feel really, really good about what I consider to be a very warm welcome back. You know, we got to do a handful of interviews after the fact. We got to talk about it. Really, really great experience. You know, we worked with Kevin over at Backroom Studios in Jersey, who was playing guitar in Dillinger by the end of their career. Kevin was in Knife the Glitter, and then he was playing in Dillinger by the time they were finishing up. And we, you know, by the end of recording Good, he had joined the band. You know, he just liked the tunes and liked us and wanted to work with us. And so he asked if we could use a second guitar player. So we were like, let's. You know,
that's great.
But a second guitar player on some of this. It's like, oh yeah, cool, awesome. You're cool. You're in. We got it.
Did you guys do many shows around this release, or?
Right. So we did a couple of things here and there. We did our initial big sort of hurrah back was we got offered in 2023, beginning of 2022, February, we got offered ZBR Fest, which is out in Chicago. Or I don't know how many. I mean, I'm sure, you know, Kevin and John have been to Chicago, but like the rest of us, I don't know. You know, it's one of those things. So we got offered to play Zegema Beach Records Fest that year, and they offered us a headlining spot on the second night, which to me is crazy. Nice. But I'm very grateful that they did. It was a very cool opportunity. It was an incredible 2 days worth of bands. Jerome's Dream played on, they headlined night one, and they're personal favorites of mine. The sheer amount of new bands doing stuff that I very much enjoy was a real, like, startling eye opener for me. Coming back, getting to mess with all these new, like, screamo bands and all these new sort of like chaotic hardcore bands and these mathcore bands, and getting on and staying on, like, Mathcore Index, those guys' radars. Those guys have been talking about us for 20 years, for give or take, right? So, like, we owe a tremendous debt to those guys for keeping us in their mouths. Like, we received some very nice praise from those guys. But yeah, we had this Chicago gig that we had booked for ZBR Fest, and so we were like, well, we should probably book one or two around it. And it was just sort of like, at the time, I'm like, like, can we just fly out there and play? And, like, I don't know, like, I'm allergic I don't want to be away. Like, I think a lot of people, when you talk about, like, touring, or you talk about, like, any sort of stint where you have to go out and you're gonna do a couple of days in a row, I think a lot of, like, parents will say things on the record where they'll be like, oh, I just don't really want to, it's not fair to my wife or my partner to stick them with all the responsibilities while I go off and I'm gallivanting and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, I could say that, I could say all that, like, cool guy stuff, but what I'm going to say is that I really like my kid. I really like my family. I do not like to be away from them, period. Like, I really don't like to be away from them. So for me, as much as, like, going out with this group of guys is 100% uptime on fun, like, couldn't be a better experience. It has to be like, just a very every once in a while special occasion kind of thing. Yeah. So we booked this Chicago festival, and it'll be very easily the biggest crowd we've ever played in front of till that point. This will be, big room with a few hundred people in it. For Sawtooth, that's like, oh my God, that's crazy, right? Yeah. So, and to headline it was crazy. So we basically played, like, a little warm-up gig at the studio where we recorded in Jersey, at Backroom Studios. And that was like a little kind of like curated bill, you know what I mean? We picked all the bands that we wanted to play with us. Like, we got Crippling Alcoholism to come because we were heavily messing with that record that year because they dropped their first album that year. And we were like, we really love what they're doing, and I really want them on the bill, and maybe they'll play it. And they did. And then a few other groups. There's, like, a few groups from around, the tri-state area that were friends of ours that we wanted to get on the bill, so on and so forth. So it was one of those things where we played a little warm-up gig. We drove a little that night. We played in Pennsylvania at the Green Beacon Gallery, which is like this really cool art gallery house that we played. That was just like such a warm, inviting crew, and we got to Seb from Meth booked that for us, and they played with us there. Awesome. And then we ended up playing with those guys. They were on ZBR as well, so we met up with them there as well. And it was just like this, again, like I said, 100% uptime on fun and just good vibes. And, even the downtime where, like, you're just hurry up and wait is, like, nice because you're with your crew and you're with your people and everything feels good and cool and everybody's praising you for your most recent efforts, Yeah. It's just really, really cool, and then, like, we played throughout the course of the year. We played Mathcore Index Fest in Brooklyn. We played at St. Vitus before it got closed down at Graf Orlock's last show, so 2023, I think, was probably, that was the live performance reaping the benefit of good coming out was in all throughout 2023.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, that feeling after so long of not being on stage and then coming back to, like, reaping the rewards of all the shit you dealt with years ago, and then be like, oh, headline a fest, and you're like, what? Oh, okay. And people are stoked and we have a new record, and
And it's
like we kind of feel the same way. Like we're doing it better than we did back then. Like
exactly. You feel like you're at your peak. You feel like you're operating on a different level. We got really lucky in that a lot of people seemingly, and maybe this is just like we're living in a polite, but it seems to me like a lot of people are, and I'm not saying everybody, because you're always going to have people that are diehard fans of one thing or another, and they're just not going to accept anything else. That is what it is, and you're free to do that. But it really feels to me like a very large chunk of the folks that were exposed to good when it came out, and maybe they were familiar with us prior to, immediately got on board with it and even regarded it at the same level, at least at the same level as what we were doing before we were gone. Can't really, can't really want more than that,
Well,
That's pretty cool.
I agree. I thought it was great. It's definitely stuck out to me. And then some of those melodies on that record, I was like, holy shit, this is really neat. And it's right up my alley as far as stuff I like to write, like just weird chordal stuff. And that's all Robinson was strumming chords really fast. We weren't very technical. That was all Jeremy. But I was just like, can I get this Deftones chord in there and just do this? Right. Like, but it made it unique. So like anytime I hear that, like my ear perks up, like over like shreddy stuff, like the blasting with melodies is always the neatest thing to me.
I agree 100% actually. And to me, like when I think of what, and I would make the argument that Sawtooth has always had a little melody buried in there, but I don't mean it. And none of us mean it in the sense that we're playing beautiful stuff,
Yeah.
When we say melodic, we mean like dictionary definition of melody. We are concerned with the notes that we are playing, and we are concerned with how they lay next to each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, to me, that's the most important thing, because the character of your riff is, to me, lives there, right? And we all bring different things to the table in that regard. I think that Sawtooth is the product of a handful of very idiosyncratic people that have a very sort of specific skill set. You know what I mean? And then each of us
hear that in the music.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to create something like that unless everyone was on that same page.
Right. Yeah. And you're just trusting each other to sort of do you, and that it'll complement. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. That kind of trust is amazing to have, and a lot of bands don't have that, And then you had a number of member changes over the years, right? Did you always kind of feel that you had that, synchronicity with each other? No.
This is like a current era sort of ESP that exists between members. I think this is more of a, this was cultivated during the good writing, and maybe it was a byproduct of not having a constant opportunity to jam together in a room, to work things out together in a room, for it to be more of this call and response, reactionary kind of like, where it's like I send something away and then I have to wait, and then I get something back, and then it's like, this maybe changes my attitude on what we're doing here, and so on and so forth. This kind of play back and forth that happens with that little bit of space of time between, where everybody has a chance. You get your this piece of media, this music, this riff or a drum part or whatever, and you have a chance to sit with it for a second and breathe for a second and assess for a second and then fire back, instead of it being in the room. Pros and cons.
I think it's a much better way to do things.
Yeah. And like when you get a riff, like when Jay sends you a riff, for example, he sends it to you, he's made his best effort to record a nice demo. He has also programmed it in MIDI, and you have all the notes, like that kind of thing.
That's next level demoing. Yeah.
So to the point where, like, if everybody has the stuff in advance, and this is more for the other guys than it is for me, because I am like the baboon in the room compared to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, they have something written in front of them. They have their notes, they have, you know, and then the conversations about any discrepancies, the conversations are purely like, well, this is what's written, you know, you have it. You know, you can, like, everybody make reference to their notes. Things are so much easier to correct and get on track when you have somebody that's communicating that way, I think. So
that's great.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, you know, that they're adult musicians in the world that are operating.
We are definitely not adult musicians, but we're doing our best to, like, I started demoing in GarageBand years ago, and I was like, oh, I can do my own drums, and like figured this out, plug my guitar into a computer, like, hell yeah. So like coming into this time around, I was living in Texas at first and then sending them stuff. So we're doing the same thing and figuring it out, and like being able, like you said, to sit with it and to have your hands off of it when you're hearing it is a completely different experience than you're all in a room. Everyone's throwing ideas. You think you got something good, and then you're not recording it. And then you get into the studio and you're like, ugh, like later. Now you can listen to it right away, but while you're not playing it, and go, okay, let's fix this. Let's move that around. And it's just a much better way to arrange things and organize your thoughts. And I don't know. I prefer it. I think there's a time and place, though, for still being in a room and just making noise, because a lot of great shit comes out of that. But to like put things together thoughtfully,
it levels the playing fields, you know. And it doesn't matter how you work as an individual. If everybody has space to ponder something, then everybody can bring their best version of themselves, which I think is cool.
For sure. Do you think you guys will put any more new music forward or going forward?
Yeah. That's the agenda. That is the whole agenda as of right now. We circled back in the beginning of 2024 and released Jabberwocky. I do want to touch on that real quick, just because.
Sure, yeah.
Reason being, that I do believe at some point, either this week or next week, or I'm not sure. I'm not sure when you go live with something like this. But
it goes out every Monday.
So the following Monday after recording it, it goes.
Yeah, next Monday, from a week from today. Yeah.
But it's very entirely possible that by the time this airs, that the physical copies of Jabberwocky are out in the wild. It's entirely possible. Because we're circling the drain on that shipment coming in and all that kind of stuff. So people will be seeing them for the first time and getting them in their hands for the first time. You know, this was a very important dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's for us as a band, to circle back to this material and finish it. You know, there was a ton of unfinished business. There's a ton of self-reflection and reconciliation that needed to happen to get that material where it needed to be. You know, it's just on some level, it's some of the most getting it right and getting it to a point where we felt incredible about putting it out there in the world was, you know, like a difficult but ultimately cathartic process that we just knew we kind of had to barrel through it. You know, to get to go under the hood on those tunes, and with the hindsight of creating good, right? To sort of reauthor those 4 tunes that make up Jabberwocky, having that as our freshest memory of the band, right? Mm-hmm. To get to basically create Good's prequel, right?
Yeah.
By going back to this sort of 10-year-old material. And
that's really cool.
Reworking it. Because at the end of the day, in a and this is going to be controversial opinion. In a perfect world, we do it with Cuddle Monster too. We go back and rewrite all of that too, right? But that's a finished product that we put out.
A bunch of people are screaming at the screen right now.
A bunch of people. Nobody wants that. Nobody but me wants that. Nobody in the band but me wants to do that. Nobody in the world but me would want to have that. It's not happening. Don't worry, it's not happening. But
I can imagine what it felt like finishing these 4 songs after all those years, especially with like the attempted comeback, Crashing and Burning. That would have been a rock in my shoe for the last decade. Like
it was, yeah. I mean, it really was. We had a lot of baggage on that, material. A lot of ourselves from that time. We're not those people anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it really took, and especially for the three of us, myself and Jay and John, who were on that material 10 years ago. It took. This is a band that edits by way of concision. We take things out. Anything that we're not 100% on, we just remove. Like we're constantly parsing down. I think that this band has become a great example of what we don't do is just as important as what we're doing. It's just as big a part of what our sound is the stuff that we're not doing. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so with that in mind, with good under our belt, we really got to go under the hood with that new philosophy and kind of rebuild those songs. And for me, and this was something that, I was on the fence about, not personally because I really wanted to, but I was not sure how the guys were going to react because I came to them and I was like, listen, I want to let's call it Jabberwocky. That's fine. I love that, but I got to rewrite these tunes. Like they can't be what they are. I have to rewrite them and they're going to be different names and they're going to be, what do you guys think about that? And to their credit, they were like, yep, 100%, get back under it, get back on it, so on and so forth. And so for me, I said to myself, if this is going to be like a prequel to what good was, and I'm in this sort of personal headspace and I'm in this sort of autobiographical headspace, I want to kind of mill my childhood a little bit with these tunes. So each tune is a story from my childhood growing up. And we chose to continue with the Jabberwocky theme because are you familiar with Jabberwocky? What Jabberwocky is in reference to?
Yes, I looked it up earlier and I already forgot the name of the author.
Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland.
Yes. Okay.
So Alice in Wonderland had a sequel story called Alice Through the Looking Glass. And in the story Through the Looking Glass, there appears a poem titled The Jabberwock. You can also read this poem separate of the rest of the story that exists. And the poem itself is largely told with completely made up nonsense vocabulary. you know what I mean? Words that Lewis Carroll made up.
Sorry,
but
just grabbing him. He's crying.
He's good. He knows about it. And basically it's a sort of like a warning poem, scare kids to behave kind of thing. This big bad, this Jabberwocky, this creature, tales of destruction and death. The kind of thing you'd use to scare children. What I mean? This big, horrible creature, and will or will not Alice come in contact with this Jabberwocky as the story goes on, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, so I started thinking about childhood, and I started thinking about myself as an adult and my recollection of my childhood. And I started thinking of how any of us recall our childhoods and how we're these weird, unreliable narrators for our own lives. You know what I mean? And we self-mytholize and we self-aggrandize and we, there's no other source for the story that you're telling somebody about your life. So whatever version of it you've brewed in your head over the last 40 years is just what it is. You know what I mean?
You played telephone with yourself.
You play telephone with yourself. So I used the sort of the general concept of this sort of tale that you tell to scare children using nonsense words to tell stories from my childhood and to basically, frame this cast of characters as essentially like cryptids, you know what I mean? Or like these creatures that do they or do they not exist? Did this or did this not happen? Right. And so Jabberwocky on whole, like from beginning to end, each of the first 3 tunes is a story from my childhood. And then the 4th tune, The Meadow, is the end of each of those stories.
That's really cool, man. I love that.
I wanted to touch on it because it's the newest thing, and it's been out for about a year, and it is about to be out in physical release within the next week or so. And we weirdly just haven't had a chance to speak about it in any meaningful way. But I really wanted to get it out there because, like, I'm not too old to be proud of what I'm doing. I feel proud of it. So
no, you're never too old for that. That's really cool. I love that approach. I also love the artwork. Who did that?
So the artwork for Jabberwocky was painted by a very close friend of the band named Mike Gaffney. He is, he was around 20 years ago when the band was first around. He was at all the local gigs. He's been a close friend of Jay and John, who are both from Rockland, where he's from as well. Since before that, like, this is a guy that we've had in our lives for the duration of the band. He was the guy that was going to do the cover art for Jabberwocky 10 years ago when we were going to do it.
Oh, well, how perfect is that?
So we reached out to him again to see if he would, paint for us, basically,
Yeah.
So, and he agreed, thankfully. We love it.
That's really cool.
It's so much.
Yeah, it's really neat looking. I just had it up here on my iTunes. I was right before Rear.
And the interesting thing is that in my writing process, because I'm not a rough draft guy, I don't like to write and write and write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. I like to think and conceptualize, and then when I'm ready to write, I write. And I do not want a ton of versions of things laying around. That just doesn't work for me that way. So the cool thing about working with Mike is that I started my brainstorming process for writing these tunes, and we didn't give him direction on visually what we wanted it to look like. I don't really operate like that. I have my hand in some visual art. I don't like being over directed. So for me, I want to give somebody a little bit of I want to point you in a direction and then just be like, so I gave him a little bit of where our heads were at, some of the, like suburban, but neglected, cryptid, childhood, you're playing in the woods, there's the state fair is coming next week, like that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like and that's kind of what I said to him, and I said, go, and then he came back with that. Right. And then I started rewriting the first tune on the record in my head to once I saw the cover.
That's sick. Yeah, it reminds me of something from The Witcher.
Yeah,
it's really neat.
And that's a perfect way to look at it, because what is he doing in that story? Right, he's hunting
monsters.
These monsters, and it's a rumor. You like, what's the rumor of this creature that's in this wilderness? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so the idea of telling these stories from my childhood and mythologizing these sort of even people from my life from back then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To me, it all fell into place at that point. And from a lyric standpoint, it might be the stuff I'm most proud of. So I feel good about it.
Well, that's awesome, dude. I love the approach to it. I love the story. I think that's really cool, and I'm glad you touched on it. I didn't mean to skip that one.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's not a big deal. We've had this weird relationship with it because we put it out, and I have this thing in my head where I have this huge soft spot for EPs. Growing up, whether it was How They Light Cigarettes in Prison by Drowning Man, which I think was just 3 or 4 songs, or like my favorite Converge material is the Poacher Diaries, which is the split they did with Agoraphobic Nosebleed. And that's only a handful of songs. Like, that's my favorite Converge record is the Poacher Diaries. You know what I mean?
That's
like,
a good one. I have not heard that in a long time.
Like, to the point where, because we were on that Converge train pretty early. You know what I mean? So like a lot of people's introductory record is Jane Doe. So a lot of people are like Jane Doe, Jane Doe. Yeah. Like we were petitioning the Empty Skies kids. You know what I mean? Like we got early. And then when we, like the Poacher Diaries, like we had such like was on a pedestal once they kind of hit that kind of spot. And, you know, I just saw it's such a perfect sort of, you know, encapsulation of what the group was best at, I thought. You know, so for me, there's like, I'm always going to have like a soft spot for EPs or splits or like these small offerings, you know, and I don't agree with the sentiment that an EP is less than. I mean, it's less than time-wise, right? It's less than far if you're the listener. But I don't think it needs to be less than quality-wise. And we certainly weren't less serious about it when we put it together. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like
I had that conversation with Nick when he was on here. I was like, you could distill most full lengths down to an EP, and it would be probably more effective, if not the same. Because like how many LPs are just amazing start to finish? There's usually some garbage in there. Very few. He's like, I have my list right here of every perfect LP ever. I'm like, of course you do.
He does. He certainly does. No, and I think that it's like all you want is to avoid that pitfall. All you want is for your record to be like banger after banger after banger. You know, but you know, and I think that my hope is that we can accomplish that with what we do next. You know, because at the end of the day, we always go into it feeling like we haven't put our best record out yet, you know. So we're always going to approach everything that we do next with that.
I think once you lose that feeling, that's when it's time to stop. But as long as you have that, you're going to keep doing right by yourself. Yeah,
like, you know, but like when Botch back in the day put out We Are the Romans, and then they put out the you know, the EP that came after it, and then they were like, we're done. we don't have any more of this. So we're done. It's like, I really respect that, actually.
That's great. Yeah, you've said what you've had to say. And if for some reason you change your mind 10 years later, then try again. But there's no reason to keep going if you're like, that's it. Like,
well, and that's for the same reason why it works so well that they came back and played a bunch of big, successful gigs playing those tunes, is the same reason why we could have never done that for our comeback. Like, you get, how many gigs does the Sawtooth Grin play Cuddle Monster? How many packed rooms do we get out of that? Or how much attention do we get? Like, we could have never done it. We hadn't had our Calculating Infinity moment. We hadn't had our We Are the Romans moment. Right. We had this retroactive praise, you know, for being at the beginning of something, or, you know, whatever, being ahead of something. But we didn't have that in the moment, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're still going for it, and I'm stoked for whatever comes next. I would love to be able to share the stage with you guys if we could get something together this year or whenever.
I feel the same way about you guys. I'm so excited to see y'all back. And, you know, at the end of the day, like, you know, I think that there is, if you're coming back with the intention of making more art, right? Ever the wrong answer, feel good about it. If you're earnest, you know,
that's what we're trying to do with, if this ends up being our last piece of work, we want to do just a strong, solid EP, 5 songs, whatever comes out, and just make that be our last thing and do our final run of shows and the last big one, and just be like, all right, we reopened the chapter that was closed in a terrible way in 2008, and now we're closing it how we want to on our own terms. And hopefully I feel that way, like after that EP though, that like, okay, that was the thing. I don't need to keep chasing this.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that that's respectable. I really like that. And I agree. I echo your sentiment. I hope that we do get to play together. I would love it. And I really, because I really wish that we got to play with Robinson back in the day, and I really wish that we got to do all kinds of things, and so it's neat to be able to potentially have these things on the table now.
Absolutely. Well, let's definitely keep in touch about that, and we'll see what we can put together.
I love it.
All right, dude. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. It was great getting to know you.
It's great getting to know you, Paul. I appreciate you having me on. And thanks for the good conversation and the good coffee partner.
Yeah. Dude. Cheers.
Cheers one more time. It's empty, but I'll pretend.
I got one sip left.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love
All right,
it.
brother. Well, I look forward to what's next from you guys. We'll definitely be in touch here. Thank you to everyone who tuned in and joined us. And remember to share the episode with a friend who you think would enjoy it. Hit me with a like and subscribe and follow. Is your personal Instagram private, or do you have that?
I'm sorry. What
for
was that?
people? Is your personal Instagram private, or do you have people follow that, or do you just want me to tell them to follow the band?
Follow the band. I don't have anything interesting going on. You're good to follow.
Yeah,
the band.
they are the Sawtooth Grin on Instagram. Shoot them a follow. Follow the podcast and leave a rating, please. Much appreciated. See you on the next one.